Mark Greenlee, the search warrant was not the moment you
I
held
am not reliving every question from that
Thornton
moment.
cooperated when agents confronted him and it broke the case.
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. Mark Greenlee did this across an entire subdivision, and when federal agents showed up with a warrant, he went back and altered the evidence rather than come clean.
Then talk to Thornton about why he chose to talk.
Your delay cost you the substantial assistance reduction.
I am done explaining silence like it was another appraisal number.
He would not get the chance to explain. Within 72 hours, federal agents would carry boxes of files out of his Charleston office and walk them down a loading dock ramp into a black SUV. 2.5 years of silence, 1 altered appraisal, 6 defendants, nearly $2 million in lender losses. By the time Mark Greenlee finally walked into a federal courtroom to plead guilty, his co-appraiser had already cooperated, taken probation, and gone home to his family. Mark Greenlee was going to federal prison. Before we go any further, I have to ask, if you knew federal agents were quietly building a case against you, would you cooperate the day they knocked on your door? Or would you wait until there was nothing left to negotiate with? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We cover white-collar accountability cases every single week, and the way this one ended will stay with you. Mark Edward Greenlee was born in 1962 in South Charleston, West Virginia, the kind of rivertown suburb where Union Carbide and FMC anchored entire neighborhoods. His father worked maintenance at one of the chemical plants on the Kanawha River. His mother kept books for a small dental practice off McCorkle Avenue. The family lived in a brick ranch on a quiet street in the Davis Creek area. 2 cars in the driveway, a tool shed out back, and a small vegetable garden his mother kept up every spring. He was the middle of 3 children, older sister, younger brother, quiet at the dinner table, steady at school. Teachers at South Charleston High School described him in yearbook captions and report cards as responsible, consistently prepared, and the kind of student who finished what he started. He was not the captain of anything. He was not the loudest voice in any room, but he was present, dependable, and trusted with small responsibilities, keeping score at junior varsity basketball games, running the lights for the school play, counting receipts at the band booster concession stand. He graduated in 1980 and enrolled at Marshall University in Huntington, an hour and a half down Interstate 64. He studied business administration with a concentration in real estate. He worked part-time in the leasing office of a student housing complex during his junior and senior years. That job was where he first saw how property values were calculated, how rents were set against comparable units, how a single piece of paper signed by a man in a tie could move thousands of dollars between strangers. He graduated in 1984 with a bachelor's degree and took an entry-level position with a small Charleston-based appraisal firm called Valley Property Services. Starting salary, $18,400 a year. His training was on the job. He rode along with a senior appraiser named Roy Whitlock for almost 2 years, learning how to measure a house, how to identify load-bearing walls, how to spot foundation cracks, how to talk to homeowners who did not want him there. His first solo appraisal was in March of 1986, a 3-bedroom split level in Cross Lanes. He came in at $68,500. The lender accepted the number. The deal closed. He kept a photocopy of that first signed appraisal in a folder in his desk drawer for the next 2 decades. He earned his West Virginia State Appraiser certification in 1991, the year the state began requiring formal licensure under federal reform statutes. He upgraded to a certified residential designation in 1994, then to certified general, the highest residential and commercial license the state issued, in 1998. By 36 years old, he could sign off on any property in West Virginia, residential or commercial, at any value. He married Linda Marie Pettit in 1989, a kindergarten teacher he had met at a church singles event in St. Albans. They bought a 4-bedroom colonial on a half-acre lot in the South Hills neighborhood of Charleston in 1992. 2 daughters followed, born in 1993 and 1996. Linda kept her teaching job at Overbrook Elementary. Mark coached his older daughter's youth soccer team for 3 seasons at the Coonskin Park Fields off Greenbrier Street. By the late 1990s, he had opened his own shop, Greenlee Appraisal Services, LLC, operating out of a small office suite on Lee Street in downtown Charleston, 3 blocks from the state capitol. He had 2 staff appraisers under him and a part-time administrative assistant named Carol. He served on the West Virginia Real Estate Appraiser and Licensing Certification Board's Continuing Education Committee. He was elected to the board of the Kanawha Valley Board of Realtors in 2001. He served as vice president in 2003 and was elected president in 2004. When he signed an appraisal, lenders did not second-guess it. He had spent 20 years building that signature into something the entire local lending industry relied on. Every promotion, every certification, every committee seat had reinforced the same idea. Mark Greenlee was a careful man, and his number was the number. That trust was about to be tested. A real estate appraisal is the document that tells a lender how much a property is actually worth. When a buyer applies for a mortgage, the bank does not just trust the sale price on the contract. The bank hires a third-party appraiser, licensed by the state, to come out, measure the property, photograph it, research comparable sales in the neighborhood, and produce a written valuation. That valuation determines how much the lender is willing to lend. The system rests on a single assumption. The appraiser is independent. The appraiser has no financial stake in whether the deal closes. The appraiser's only job is to produce an honest number. The form most residential appraisers used in 2006 was the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, known in the industry as the URAR, or the 1004, 6 pages, standardized fields, square footage, lot size, condition, room count, recent sales of nearby homes, adjustments for differences between the subject property and the comparables. At the bottom, a signature line and a license number. Once that signature went on, the appraisal became the lender's primary document for setting the loan amount. The vulnerability sat in the comparables. An appraiser was supposed to use the 3 or 4 most recent, most similar sales in the immediate area to anchor the value. But the appraiser chose which comparables to include. The appraiser chose which to leave out. An honest appraiser would select the comparables that produced the most accurate market picture. A dishonest appraiser could cherry-pick the highest sales, ignore the lower ones, and produce a number that bore almost no relationship to reality. In a normal market, the system worked because most appraisers were honest. Most lenders had internal review processes, and most properties sold within a predictable range. In the housing bubble of the mid-2000s, all 3 of those safeguards weakened at once. Lenders were originating loans they planned to sell off to the secondary market within days. Review departments were understaffed and overworked, and property values were rising so fast that even outlandish numbers looked plausible. By 2005, an appraiser willing to inflate values was a valuable asset. By 2006, in certain corners of the country, that willingness was being actively recruited. Hurricane, West Virginia, was one of those corners. The Stonegate subdivision sat just off Tees Valley Road in Hurricane Putnam County, about 30 miles west of Charleston. Rolling lots, established trees, brick and vinyl homes built in the 1990s and early 2000s. Median sale prices in the neighborhood ran between $280,000 and $360,000 in 2006. Solid middle-class housing in a quiet West Virginia bedroom community. Deborah Joyce was a Putnam County developer who saw an opportunity. She wanted to build new construction in Stonegate at prices well above what the existing homes were actually worth. To justify those prices to lenders, she needed comparable sales in the subdivision that supported her numbers. The problem was that those comparable sales did not exist. The homes already in Stonegate were selling at their honest market values. So, Joyce decided to manufacture comparables. She approached existing homeowners in the subdivision and entered into purchase contracts at or near actual market value. She would then resell those same homes at roughly double the price to outside investors. Once those inflated sales closed and were recorded in county records, they would become the comparables that justified the prices of her new construction. The plan only worked if appraisers were willing to sign off on the inflated numbers. In late 2005, Joyce connected with Raymond Paul Morris, a Utah-based operator who ran an investor group called 100X. Morris recruited novice investors out of Utah, people with money to put down and no idea what West Virginia property was actually worth. He pitched the Stonegate homes as lucrative real estate deals, never mentioning that Joyce had the same properties under contract for half the price. To make the deals close, the conspiracy needed one more piece. The buyers needed to appear to bring their own down payments to closing. They did not have the cash. So co-conspirator Michael Hurd, operating out of his home in Sandy, Utah, ran a sham entity called the Gift Program, also marketed under the name Advanced Capital Services. On paper, it looked like a seller-funded down payment assistance program. In reality, it was a mechanism to route inflated sale proceeds back to the buyers so that lenders would unknowingly fund their own down payments. The entire scheme depended on the appraisal. Joyce found two appraisers willing to provide the numbers she needed. One was James Thornton. The other was Mark Greenlee. In August of 2006, Greenlee was hired to appraise a property at 62 Stone Ridge in the Stonegate subdivision. The home was a single-family residence, well-maintained, comparable to surrounding properties that had recently sold in the $300,000 range. Joyce had the property under contract from its actual owner for $355,000, already a generous figure, near the top of the honest market range. Greenlee's appraisal came in at $645,000. He doubled the value of the home. To get to that number, he had to select comparables that did not honestly reflect the neighborhood. He used inflated sales from elsewhere. He omitted closer, lower comparables that would have undermined the figure. He later admitted he purposefully concealed material information about the comparables he used to justify the inflated price. He knew which homes belonged in the report. He chose to leave them out. When the appraisal was finished, he emailed it across state lines from his Charleston office to a mortgage broker in Utah. The broker submitted it to a lender. The lender funded the loan based on the $645,000 number. At closing, Hurd wired $133,000 to make it appear the buyer had brought personal funds to the table. The remaining $290,000 in proceeds was sent to the gift program. After reimbursing itself, Hurd's outfit wired $65,000 to the buyer and $72,000 to Morris as a commission. The buyer tried to resell immediately. There was no market for the property at $645,000. There was no market for it at $500,000. The overvaluation was so obvious that the home could not be flipped at any meaningful profit. The subsidized mortgage payments ran out. The buyer defaulted. The lender foreclosed. The bank eventually disposed of 62 Stone Ridge in a short sale for $282,500. The write-off exceeded $360,000. Greenlee was paid his appraisal fee, $450. He moved on to his next assignment. Between July of 2006 and December of 2007, 5 existing homes and 1 vacant lot were flipped through this same machine. Total lender losses across the scheme approached $2 million. No one inside the lending pipeline caught it in real time. No one at the title company. No one at the mortgage broker. No one in the lender's underwriting department. The appraisals carried the signature of a state-licensed appraiser, and that was supposed to be enough. In November of 2008, federal agents from the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigative Division executed simultaneous search warrants at 2 locations. The first was the Putnam County home of developer Deborah Joyce. The second was the South Hills residence of Mark Greenlee. It was a Tuesday morning. Linda was at work at Overbrook Elementary. The 2 girls were in school, one at George Washington High, one at John Adams Middle. Greenlee was in his bathrobe finishing a cup of coffee at the kitchen island when the doorbell rang. The agents at his door identified themselves and presented the warrant. They were looking for appraisal files, comparable sales worksheets, email correspondence with anyone in Utah, anything connected to the Stonegate subdivision. They came in with cardboard evidence boxes. They photographed his home office. They imaged the hard drive on his desktop computer. They left with file cabinets emptied and storage shelves picked clean. When the agents asked Greenlee if he would sit down for an interview, he declined. He told them he wanted to consult an attorney first. That was his legal right. It was also the first inflection point in the case, and it was the first time he chose silence. He hired a Charleston defense attorney by the end of the week. Through counsel, he refused to provide any cooperation. No interview, no statements, no timeline, no identification of other participants, nothing. The federal investigation continued without him. In the months that followed, agents traced wire transfers across 3 states. They subpoenaed lender files. They reconstructed the chain of inflated sales. They identified Morris in Utah, Hurd in Sandy, and a half-dozen straw buyers and middlemen. The picture came together slowly, document by document. Every piece they pulled pointed back toward 2 appraisals in particular, one signed by Thornton, one signed by Greenlee. In October of 2009, nearly a year after the Greenlee search warrant, agents approached James Thornton. Thornton answered the door, listened to what the agents said, and asked them to come in. He cooperated immediately. He sat for interviews. He walked agents through his own appraisals line by line. He identified Joyce as the person who had brought him the work. He explained the pressure to inflate, the way comparables had been suggested to him, the way the numbers had been built backward from the price Joyce wanted to hit. He produced documents. He answered questions for hours. The cooperation broke the case wide open. Thornton's statements corroborated the paper trail. They tied the West Virginia appraisers directly to the Utah operators. They closed the loop on Joyce. They gave prosecutors the witness they needed. 11 months after the Thornton interview, the first indictments came down. Greenlee was named on a wire fraud charge. He did not enter into a plea agreement until June of 2011. 2 years and 7 months had passed since the agents had stood in his foyer with cardboard boxes. By the time Greenlee finally signed his plea, the case file was already complete without him. Investigators had reconstructed the 62 Stone Ridge transaction in forensic detail. They had the original purchase contract between Joyce and the prior owner at $355,000. They had Greenlee's appraisal at $645,000. They had the email sent from his Charleston office to a mortgage broker in Utah, transmitting the fraudulent document across state lines. That single email was what made the case federal. Wire fraud. 18 U.S.C. Sections 1343 and 2. They had the comparable sales analysis from a legitimate review appraiser, demonstrating that the honest market value of 62 Stone Ridge in August of 2006 was approximately $310,000 to $340,000. They had documentation of the closing, including the wire from Hurd's gift program account for $133,000 to simulate a personal down payment. They had the kickback wires, $65,000 to the buyer, $72,000 to Morris. They had the short sale records showing the lender's eventual loss of more than $360,000 on that one property alone. They had Thornton's statements. They had cooperating witness testimony from a straw buyer who had taken a plea in Utah. They had bank records, title records, real estate filings, corporate registration documents for the gift program and advanced capital services. They had Morris's pitch materials to his 100X investors, none of which disclosed Joyce's underlying contract price. And then they had the smoking gun. In late 2009, the West Virginia Real Estate Appraiser and Licensing Certification Board had opened its own administrative investigation into Greenlee's Stonegate appraisals, separate from the federal criminal case. The state board began requesting copies of his appraisal files. That was the moment Greenlee made his worst decision. He went back to his copy of the 62 Stone Ridge appraisal, the same appraisal he had signed and emailed to Utah in August of 2006, and he altered it. He modified the document, not to correct an honest mistake, not to add clarifying information. He changed it to make the original work appear less indefensible. He tampered with his own evidence at the exact moment regulators were beginning to look at it. Federal investigators eventually obtained both versions. The original, as it had been transmitted to the Utah broker in 2006. and the altered copy from Greenlee's own files. Side by side, they were not the same document. A bad appraisal was a regulatory problem. An altered appraisal was consciousness of guilt. It told investigators, in Greenlee's own hand, that he knew what he had done was wrong. He knew the original number was indefensible, and his first instinct, when the system finally began closing in, was not to come clean. It was to cover his tracks. The case against him was no longer about a single inflated number. It was about a licensed professional who had doubled a home's value, hidden the comparables that would have exposed him, refused to cooperate with federal agents for nearly 3 years, and tampered with the evidence in between. We're heading into the courtroom now. Before we do, if this case has held your attention this long, that's because the story deserved to be told properly. Subscribe if you agree. These white-collar cases destroy neighborhoods, retirement accounts, and entire communities, and they rarely get the coverage they deserve. We do this every single week. There was no dramatic arrest scene for Mark Greenlee, no body cam footage of a sting at his front door. The confrontation, for him, played out across a long, slow series of meetings inside the federal courthouse on Virginia Street East in Charleston. The first occurred in June of 2011. Greenlee, his defense attorney, Assistant United States Attorney Thomas C. Ryan, and 2 case agents sat across a conference room table in the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of West Virginia. Greenlee was 49 years old. He had not signed an appraisal in nearly 2 years. His license had been suspended pending the state board's action. His Lee Street office was closed. The plate glass window with his name on it had been papered over from the inside. Ryan put the terms on the table. 1 count of aiding and abetting wire fraud. The factual basis included the 62 Stone Ridge appraisal, the email transmission to Utah, the concealment of unfavorable comparables, and the alteration of the document after the state board began investigating. Greenlee's attorney went through the document line by line. He stopped at the alteration paragraph. Defense attorney: My client wants to make sure the record is accurate about exactly what language was changed in the appraisal. Ryan answered without looking up from his own copy. Ryan: The record is accurate. We have both versions of the document, the original as transmitted in 2006, the altered version from your client's files. We are not negotiating the facts. There was a long pause. The attorney leaned over and spoke quietly to his client. Greenlee did not respond at first. He stared at the document in front of him. He had spent 27 years building a signature that lenders trusted. He had served as president of the Kanawha Valley Board of Realtors. He had sat on the State Appraisal Board's Continuing Education Committee. He had built a family in a 4-bedroom colonial in South Hills on the strength of that signature. He finally looked up at the prosecutor. Greenlee: What about cooperation now? Is there anything left I could offer to help the office? Ryan set his pen down. Ryan: Mr. Greenlee, the time for cooperation was November of 2008. Mr. Thornton cooperated in October of 2009. The case is built. We are not asking you for anything you can give us anymore. Greenlee's shoulders dropped. He did not ask another question. He signed the plea agreement 2 months later, in September of 2011. He left the federal courthouse that day through the parking garage exit on Capitol Street. The sentencing hearing took place on August 21, 2012, in Courtroom B on the 3rd floor of the Robert C. Byrd United States Courthouse in Charleston. United States District Judge Thomas E. Johnston presided. Greenlee wore a charcoal suit with a navy tie. Linda sat in the second row of the gallery with their 2 daughters, now 19 and 16. His older sister sat behind them. His parents were not in attendance. His father had died of cancer in early 2011, during the years Greenlee was refusing to plead. The government's sentencing memorandum, filed by Assistant United States Attorney Ryan, ran 22 pages. It detailed the Stonegate scheme, the 62 Stone Ridge appraisal, the inflated value, the email across state lines, the lender's $360,000 loss, and the alteration of the appraisal after the state board began its inquiry. It also detailed, in plain and pointed language, the timeline of Greenlee's refusal to cooperate. The memorandum noted, for comparison, the cooperation of James Thornton. Same scheme, same subdivision, same conspirators, same fraudulent inflation of property values. But Thornton had answered the door in October of 2009 and walked agents through everything. Thornton, the memorandum noted, would be sentenced later that same month to 5 years of probation, no prison time, in recognition of his early and substantial assistance. The contrast was the entire argument. Defense counsel asked for a downward departure. He argued that Greenlee had no prior criminal record, that he had been a productive member of the community for nearly 3 decades, that his wife and daughters were innocent victims of his collapse, that the public humiliation of losing his license, his business, and his board presidency had already imposed significant punishment. Judge Johnston listened. Then he spoke. Judge Johnston: Mr. Greenlee, you held a license issued by the state of West Virginia. The purpose of that license was to protect lenders, buyers, and the integrity of the residential real estate market in this state. When you signed an appraisal, the entire transaction relied on the assumption that you were honest. You doubled a home's value. You concealed the comparables that would have exposed you. You transmitted the false document across state lines so that a lender in another state would fund a loan it never would have funded otherwise. And when regulators began to look at your work, you altered the file. He paused. Judge Johnston: What separates your case from Mr. Thornton's is not the underlying conduct. It is the conduct after the conduct. Mr. Thornton accepted responsibility when agents arrived at his door. You did not. The court will not pretend that the difference is small. It is not small. It is the difference between a defendant who helps the system correct itself and a defendant who forces the system to do its work the hard way. The sentence was 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, restitution of approximately $180,000, joint and several with the co-defendants, no reduction for substantial assistance. The combined sentences across the 6 defendants in the Stonegate case totaled 166 months of imprisonment. Deborah Joyce, 46 months. Raymond Morris, 57 months. Michael Hurd, 27 months. Todd Joyce, 18 months. Mark Greenlee, 18 months. James Thornton, probation. Greenlee reported to the Federal Correctional Institution at Morgantown, West Virginia, a low-security facility about 2 hours northeast of Charleston, in October of 2012. He served his time. He was released to supervised release, and he returned to a Charleston that was no longer his. His state appraiser's license was revoked permanently. He could not legally sign another appraisal in West Virginia ever again. The office on Lee Street was leased to a new tenant. The plate glass window was replaced. The Kanawha Valley Board of Realtors removed his name from its list of past presidents. The lender that had funded the 62 Stone Ridge loan absorbed the loss, passed it down the secondary market, and contributed its small piece to the larger collapse that was already underway across the entire American mortgage industry in 2008 and 2009. For Mark Greenlee, the cost of silence was the gap between 5 years of probation and 1.5 years in federal prison. James Thornton had been standing on the same ground in October of 2009. He had answered the door. Mark Greenlee had not. That case was a slow-motion lesson in the price of stonewalling. But the case on the right-hand side is even worse. Click it now.